So that's the kind of negativity, that's the kind of irresponsibility that I think that, that people are so tired of in politics and ready for changing.
Mr. Perdue.
Well, Michelle, that's a little bit like the pot calling the kettle black. First, let's set the record straight. I have to do this for our former president, President George H.W. Bush. He has endorsed me. This is her ex-boss that has endorsed me in this campaign because he's concerned about the future direction of our country. But first, let me just answer this. I think the most egregious thing in this debate has been all the false attacks on me about my character, my career, and they've all been proven false by independent fact checkers. It just seems to me that this is an attempt at distraction away from the real critical issue in this race, and that's job creation here in Georgia. People are hurting in this state, and she's trying to distract people away from the real critical issue. President Obama said that his failed policies like Obamacare that's going to destroy 2.5 million jobs across this country, according to the Congressional Budget Office. It just seems to me that his policies, he said, are on the ballot in this race. And in this state, in Georgia, those policies go by the name of Michelle Nunn.
Ms. Wofford, let's hear from you.
That I've been called selfish for taking the personal responsibility to present an alternative in this race for someone that wants to stand up for most Georgians who want to have more control over their own life and the ability to make their own decisions, who don't believe that either party is giving us options to really take control, who want to have voices in this race to stand up against both parties who no longer allow us to understand that it's about personal responsibility and individual liberties. And that's the most egregious thing. Certainly that both parties somehow are entitled to your vote. You know, your vote is your vote, and it's your power and responsibility to use that vote in the way you see fit and to vote for the candidate that you believe represents you the best, not who you believe could win the horse race that actually is our political system has turned into.
To Lori's point, let's get some clarity on an issue, please. You have both mentioned the Bush family a couple of times already. So, Ms. Nunn, your campaign is using the former President George H.W. Bush in a campaign ad. But then this is what was said by one of the president's spokespersons, saying, quote, Michelle and her team have been clearly, repeatedly, and consistently told that President Bush did not want them to use his photo as part of this campaign. Apparently the Nunn team feels they can repeatedly disregard the former president's wishes and on and on. It's very clear their wishes. That ad is still running. Why?
That ad is a perfect, I think, embodiment of my message, which is that I'm going to work with whoever the president is, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. In that ad is President George H.W. Bush, who I've worked with, President George W. Bush, President Clinton, and President Obama. And I believe that we have too much of the partisanship and the kind of prosecution that David talks about, and not enough problem solving together. I spent 7 years working with President George H.W. Bush's Points of Light organization. Unlike David, I don't want to erase parts of my resume, and I'm not going to. This is a significant dimension of what I have done and who I am and what this race is about. And it's no surprise that, of course, we know that that David can work with his fellow Republicans. The question is, can he work with Democrats? He has said that there's not a single Democratic idea or issue that he could find to work together with Democrats on. So again, I think when you talk about disrespectful, you should talk about the ad that has been called the worst in the nation. And that's a high threshold to reach these days.
Mr. Perdue?
Well, let's set the record straight again. Her ex-boss in this race did not endorse Michelle Nunn. He actually sent a press release out supporting us in our campaign to change the direction of this country. But again, another distraction away from the failed policies of this administration that my opponent, Michelle Nunn, supports. The president's own amnesty bill will bring 15 million new workers into this country. This is a bill that she supports. And by the way, she talks about all working together. That sounds like the story, the bill of goods that our president told us in 2008 when he said, I'll work with the Republican Party in a bipartisan way. The first thing he did is he crammed Obamacare down our throat. His signature bill that's destroying 2.5 million jobs in our country. Is it any wonder why she's going to be a rubber stamp for this president? And any wonder why he puts on the radio, elect Michelle Nunn so that she can get up there and help him continue his good work?
Ms. Nunn.
So, David, I know that that this is the line of attack. Speaking of distractions, that you would like to, and a farmer told me this. He said David wants to run against Harry Reid, but he should have moved to Nevada if he'd wanted to do that. And if he'd wanted to run against the president, he should have run for president. But you are running against me. And I have made very clear that I have real differences with the president, and I will stand up for those differences, whether it's actually moving forward with the Keystone Pipeline. I think it's incredibly important that we reverse the cuts that the president has made and Congress in our defense budget. And I also think that the president and Congress should have done a better job of working together on the long-term debt. But I'll work together with the president, Republican or Democrat, when it means, for instance, raising the minimum wage or pay equity or actually, tackling the tremendous problems that are before us as a nation.
If I can go to the panel now from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Daniel Malloy.
Mr. Perdue, you just said the attacks lobbed against you have been false. Have you outsourced jobs in your career?
No.
Why? What's the difference between outsourcing products and services and outsourcing jobs?
Look, I've explained this. At Dollar General, we created tens of thousands of jobs, and we outsourced products there. But what I've said all along, that these false attacks are taking away from the real debate that we ought to having that the people of Georgia want. I've traveled all over the state. People are concerned about their jobs. And when you see a president bragging about that his policies, which are failing us, by the way, we have fewer people working in America right now as a percentage than any time since Jimmy Carter was president. I don't consider that good works. In the state of Georgia alone, we have 400,000 workers who had to go on food stamps more than got jobs in the last 6 years. Those are not good works. It just seems to me that this president has said that his policies are on the ballot. And in the state of Georgia, those failed policies go by the name of Michelle Nunn.
So, David, let's be clear about the facts. In a deposition, under oath, you said that you spent the majority of your career outsourcing. You then went on to list 16 different countries where you had created jobs. Korea, China, Taiwan, Mexico. Not once did you mention the U.S. You were the head of sourcing for Sara Lee. You were the head of sourcing for Gitano, all in Asia. Sara Lee, 500 jobs closed right here in Georgia. So if that's not outsourcing jobs, I don't know what is. You've said that people who question your business career just don't understand, but so far I don't think you've been able to clarify for us.
Well, let me answer just one part of that. You said just a minute ago that you talked to a farmer about this. And again, all these attacks have been proven false, not just in this general election, but in the primary and the runoff as well. But talking to a farmer, Michelle, it's interesting that you can do that without feeling like a hypocrite. You told that farmer how important he and his business is to you, and yet in your own plan, you rated farming issues number 18 in your list of priorities, and you actually rated rural issues dead last. That's the kind of distraction that I'm talking about. You don't want to talk about the sleight of hand where you say one thing to one group and another thing to another. I think Barack Obama wants you in his Senate to fight for him, not for the people of Georgia.
So, David, you continue to reference a memo, something that was put together by a staff team that listed a set of issues that they needed to do memos on. You know very well that if you actually look at my website, we talk about agriculture. Your website, under the issues, there's nothing under agriculture. So let's talk about where we're actually presenting ourselves to the public and what the issues are that we're talking about. If you want to talk about the issues, I'd love to talk about the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is something that Saxby Chambliss and Johnny Isakson said was perhaps the most important piece of legislation for the most people in the state of Georgia. And you were opposed to it. The Farm Bureau said that they wanted it. We would still, if we had your way, we would still have farmers that did not have the clarity of actually having a Farm Bill passed. That's not what we need in Washington. We don't need more gridlock. That seems to be what you want more and more of.
And this is an interesting issue, Mr. Perdue, about the Farm Bill and what's actually tied to it.
Well, it's a perfect example in an ombudsman bill where only 20% of that bill related to the farmer. The other 80% was related to the food stamp program that needs to be reformed. But let me go back to that plan. In her own plan, her own advisor said that she was too liberal for the state of Georgia, that she's not even a real Georgian. They had to put her in rural scenes so that people would think that rural issues were important to her, and yet rural issues were rated dead last. This is not the kind of senator we need in Washington. We need somebody to be a champion for the working men and women in Georgia who are concerned about their kids and their future. Barack Obama wants her up there to defend his policies. He said that on the radio here. He wants her to go to Washington to help him continue his good works. Well, his good works have produced fewer people working right now as a percentage than any time since Jimmy Carter was president. That's not the kind of senator we need in Washington.
All right, we know that you all have been on this. We'll have a chance to get right back here, but now to our next panelist, please. Candace.
Ms. Nunn, short of seeing you in person out on the campaign trail, the most repeated thing I think many viewers have heard you say, either on television or listening to the radio, is that, quote, "I defer to the President of the United States." I'd like to give you an opportunity right now to, let's assume perhaps it was taken out of context. What exactly did you mean when you said that?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. But I do want to go back and tell David that he continues to cite a memorandum put together by a group of staff people that his staff got a hold of. And you know, it is completely egregious. This memo said this was how my opponent would attack me. And he has used those as truths throughout the campaign. I frankly, when they showed me it, I didn't believe that somebody would ever connect George H.W. Bush's points of light with terrorism. But, David, you surprised me. You went farther than I could imagine anybody would. As it relates to your question, this is another example, again, and it's been cited. David has taken one line from a debate and used it to apply to every form of issue. I said that one line in the context of a personnel decision related to the Veterans Administration. Ultimately, the President does make personnel decisions. And I was the first to come out shortly thereafter to say that we should replace the head of the VA. I have spent my entire career trying to make a difference. Much of that actually focused on veterans, and so I have a deep commitment to making sure that we are doing everything possible for veterans. But this is the kind of campaign that David has run, in which he has taken snippets, pieces of pictures or lines, and used them in a way that is completely misrepresenting the truth.
Butto.
I'm sorry. She's gone all over this state talking to military personnel and our veterans, telling them how important it is to have a strong military. And yet on the very issues that we know are a disaster inside the Veterans Administration, she's going to defer to this president who is responsible for the debacle in the first place. I just believe that if we're going to set this nation on a new direction, we need people in the Senate that are not going to be a rubber stamp for Barack Obama. Again, he said his policies are on the ballot and that she will be a rubber stamp for that. That's why he wants her in the Senate. I want to go to the Senate to fight for the people of Georgia.
Ms. Nunn?
So, David, you know very well you continue to use rubber stamp. I believe that everything that you've said in this campaign would lead one to believe that you want to be a rubber stamp for gridlock in Washington. But I want to remind you, I've spent about 45 minutes of my life with President Obama. I have spent 7 years working for President George H.W. Bush's Points of Light organization. I spent 47 years with my father, and I have a deep and abiding commitment, I've talked about it for the entire campaign, to working across party lines. I believe that we can work together to get things done. It's a very different approach than the one that you have shared in the campaign trail, and I believe, you know, it is a legitimate difference to say that you are seemingly in favor of more of the partisanship and more of the gridlock, and that I actually believe the way to break through it is to work together.
Quick rebuttal, then we'll move on.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, let's talk about gridlock, Michelle. You know, the president blames gridlock on the Republicans in Congress, and yet today there are over 300 bills on Harry Reid's desk. They're not going anywhere. They're not going into debate in the Senate because this allows this president to run our country with executive order and regulatory mandate. This is the president that you flip-flopped when he came out and wouldn't do a travel ban with Ebola. We have a lack of leadership. And you flip-flopped later after I asked for a travel ban with regard to Ebola crisis. You then now support my position to ask for a travel ban. But let's make one thing perfectly clear. Your story of coming together and working in a bipartisan way is a false promise, just like President Obama promised in 2008, just before he crammed Obamacare down the throats of the minority.
Let's talk immigration reform. On the one hand, the United States and the states have finite resources, and there is a system in place for legal immigration. Most Americans would agree the system's broken. The borders are porous, and yet there are families and children caught in limbo. Heartbreaking realities. So to each candidate, where are you on immigration reform? We'll start with Ms. Nunn, then Ms. Wofford, then Mr. Perdue.
I embraced the bipartisan immigration reform that Marco Rubio and John McCain led. I believe that we need to make sure that we secure our borders. That legislation would have